Folk Network. My name is Trevor, and with me today is Sarah
Hello.
and Eric.
Hello.
Today on episode 3, our discussion topics are going to include the different types of truths. We're also going to discuss regional gods, and these, as usual, are our individual opinions and not necessarily the opinions of our tribe. This series of podcasts is in a discussion format. Several discussion topics are presented in each episode. We look to archaeology and written works as examples, but also use personal judgment for things open to interpretation. Okay, so Eric is going to elaborate on the different truths as far as Asatru and its subcategories go. So take it away, Eric.
So I have a short list here. It's not, it's not all encompassing, but these are the most common ones I've found on the internet, which is the best place to look for stuff to talk about.
Of course, reliable information.
So we have Asatru, which means true to the Aesir. We have Vanatru, which means true to the Vanir. We have Rokertru / Thursatru, which is true to the giants. And Lokatru, which means true to Loki. And we all have opinions about that, and you're going to enjoy them. So these aren't like written down in dusty tomes somewhere. These aren't 1,000-year-old terms. I think these are.
I think all of them
more
are
recent.
modern,
They're
right?
more recent.
Do
Yeah.
you consider them more of a neo-pagan, modern?
Word, at least. Yeah.
And I think that Asatru is the oldest, so it's the biggest, and it's the one that all of the organizations that you're familiar with, or all the books that you'd go looking for, I think those are more aligned with Asatru as a title. But you can get more nuance, quote unquote. You can't see my air bunnies, but I'm throwing them up with my air quotes. Vanatru being the idea that you lean more into the fertility gods and stuff, which people could argue is more appropriate for our day because we're not going out and declaring war on each other like the Aesir like to do. Rokertru or Thursatru is the idea that you're honoring those giants who, because they are symbols or agents of chaos and change, that you need the idea that the gods of order would be too static. And Lokatru, I think that comes from Tom Hiddleston love myself, but we'll get into that later. So I'm personally of the idea that as an Asatru you can honor certain Vanir gods like Frey and Jord and Nerthus and Njord, who are not Aesir specifically, but still kind of would be the ones who would be upheld most as a Vanatru are. And same with Rokertru and Thursatru. I think people tend to take it to an extreme with them, like honoring Hel and Jormungand and stuff. Right. But there's like I just said, Gerd and Jord, who are technically giantesses. Skadi is technically a giantess as the daughter of Thiazi. We still honor them or acknowledge them, or however you want to talk about it, without being like, no giants allowed at the table.
Right.
And then Lokatru, here in our tribe, we tend to have a harder line against no Loki ensemble because we believe that it brings bad luck. And there's not enough wood to go knocking on to save yourself from the superstitious nonsense.
Right. Yeah, and there are many groups that are Lokians, as they call themselves, which most of the things that I have read on that are more of a modern neo-pagan or neo-heathen kind of belief, and that's specifically what they believe in. They believe that there's power in the chaos and the turmoil that Loki brings with him everywhere he goes. And so our personal group believes that that's something we shouldn't bring up in any kind of a ritual, as it affects our collective luck of the group. But as Eric was saying earlier, there are Vanir and such gods like Skadi, like he was saying, that is a giantess. And so as far as giants go, we don't honor the Jotun, which are the giants in Norse mythology specifically, because most Jotuns are kind of not nice, really, and cause a lot of destruction and turmoil and chaos. So, but some of them are giants as well as gods, or descended from a mixture of gods and giants. So we don't overlook that.
kind of going back to last week's talk, if you were brave enough to listen to that, on the idea of we're all feeling pretty nervous about that because it's kind of an elephant in the room. But there's no such thing as a pure Aesir unless you're talking about the one that was licked out of salt, which I think his name was Bor, and then it was Buri, or was it Bor and Bestla or Buri and Bestla? Anyway, the point is the only pure one, quote unquote, with no giant admixture, if you're going to take this down to, looking at the like races of people as opposed to just different entities in the same primordial state of the world before we see things like land and air and sea, you wouldn't be able to honor Odin, and people really like honoring Odin, and you wouldn't be able to honor Thor, and people really like honoring Thor because they are, quote unquote, half giant,
right,
by their giantess mothers.
Right. Yeah, and so they like Eric said, they are half giant, so you can't overlook that fact. And so that's something in the that would fall under Asatru. Thurs means giant or Jotun in Norse mythology and Germanic mythology.
I think Asatru is more like honoring the giants at the expense of the gods,
right?
As opposed to including gods or including giants in your god worship. And this, we're all getting into, I think the biggest problem with this discussion is that people are focusing their spyglass on the gods and saying, oh, which higher powers do I need to worship to get to work safely today?
Right.
When in reality, you should be thinking more about your land spirits and your ancestors for your day to day.
Right.
Yeah.
Which segues into a little bit about our regional gods is one of our topics. And I'd like Sarah to elaborate on what my mountain or my tree. We have a tree on our property that we believe is, has some kind of a special property. So would you like to elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. I think these two topics go together really well. So it's, all these different, camps of, only being Asatru, so only worshiping Aesir, only worshiping Vanir. But really that also goes into regional gods. So I know with Ulfar Folk in particular, we kind of favor some over another. And the reason would be, like we talked about in our first episode, that we have a very specific climate and, region here, in that we're in the mountains. So we focus a lot more on, mountainous gods or things that would help us here, in the foothills. So we have I know myself and another member, Savannah, like to hail Scotty a lot because we're super into archery and really love the snow and just kind of everything that's Scotty represents, if you will. And so that's one of our regional gods. And I think we do a lot for Freyr too, for the same reason, is we have a lot of wilderness around us. And so he's kind of one of our regional gods, if you will. But then we also have,
Ullr.
Yeah, Ullr. That's not where I was going, but okay, yeah. So as far as what you were saying, Trevor, my mountain or my tree is right. That we have a really big ponderosa pine on our property, and that's kind of like the center focal point of our property. And so we feel like if we're going to leave anything for the Landvetter or like the Tomta or things like
right,
that,
any kind of offering.
Right. Any offerings we'll generally leave at that tree.
Right. Yeah. It just seems kind of special. It's really big. It's really old, and it's been there, for a long time. So I feel like it has the most magical qualities of anything on our land here. And so when we honor the land spirits or give them an offering, that we feel that's one of the places we would pour out some of the leftover mead after a sumbel or a ritual to honor the land spirits.
This kind of goes into what I've been doing recently. I've been trying to do more like house spirit stuff, by leaving little offerings. And I was I was stuck on the idea of like, what do I name this land spirit? I want to give this land spirit a name and not just be like, hey, you, General Vitir, pay attention to me.
Yeah.
Show me
Joe.
love. Exactly. So what I did was like, what about steward? Like someone who takes care of your property. And then it changed to Stuart. So now I have a land spirit named Stew. And he doesn't eat stew specifically, but he gets first cut on some of the stuff that I'll like make myself. I don't necessarily need to give Stew my hamburger from Burger King, but when I make food, like for Ostara, I'm probably going to make my horrible little bunny biscuits that look
they were cute.
No.
They were. Trevor says no, like don't do it.
No, I like them.
I say no, like they were adorable. I thought they were snails, and it still worked for me. I thought that was on purpose.
They were supposed to be rabbits, and they looked like snails, which tells you how good I am at pastries. But the point is, when I do something special like that, Stu gets, the first best looking snail rabbit abomination.
Snail rabbit combo. Yeah. So anyway, it's offering, to the land spirits and the regional gods in our area, like Sarah was saying, would most likely, be something that had to do with a mountainous kind of a god, the forest, as opposed to a sea god, one of the Vanir like Njord.
Yeah.
If we lived right on the ocean, on the coast of Maine or something, that may be the more of the kind of god or land spirits in general that fall along those kind of lines of a sea type god or deity.
We should have like a lobster god if we lived like
well,
on the
yeah,
coast.
maybe we got a lobster god. That's it. Yeah.
Turns out Njord just has a pet lobster that no one's ever heard about before.
The god of clam chowder.
Oh, I could get into that. I don't know.
But yeah, for us, it's around here the forest is what we're surrounded by. So our land spirits and offerings and such, and the pantheon that we mostly focus on, have to do more with the forest and the land around here,
and like farm and ranch,
right, and harvest
life and animals,
things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of driving from up here in the mountains down into the valley, and I get this like very conscious shift of I'm going from Thor's territory of all these yellow hills with all this ranching and oak trees out the wazoo, going down into the valley, which has almond orchards out the wazoo and a lot more of that settled agriculture. So I always feel like I'm going from Thor to Frey or vice versa. And then when you get really high up into the mountains where people are mostly, the agriculture is logging and taking your cows up for the summer, I start to get this Frigga feeling, or this Frau Halla feeling, the wife of Odin, because it makes sense to me that Odin's kind of a windy, stormy sky father. It makes sense to me that the mountain, where the land, your earth, is closest to the sky, is where you would find your bride of Odin, your Jord or your Frigg or your Frau Halla or whatever that figure is for you. Again, we're not in the business of prescribing to other people what their deities are, but whoever that is for you, that's when I start to feel like her presence is when we start to get into tall pines and sharp mountains. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the rock in particular kind of brings a different kind of energy and feeling than the woods, kind of where we live more, but it's not a far stretch or drive or climb or hike from woods to rock.
Right, and we do have different regions. Within an hour's drive, the landscape can change dramatically from, like Eric was saying, from mountains and tall pine trees to farmland and and fields full of different crops. So going from a Thor to a Freyr type of region, you can almost see the transition. And so, depending on where you are, your regional gods may look a little different or be different based on where you're actually located. From the mountains to the sea, depending on where you're at. So that's something to look into when you're honoring, that your land spirits and your gods are kind of in tune with your area.
Okay, so we kind of touched on it and then ran right over it to get to mountains. But so what are your feelings on only, I don't know, celebrating or worshipping as far as only Asatru, only Vanatru, only.
I think it's limiting. I think that we have really strong evidence for Odin, Thor, and Frey worship historically.
Mm-hmm.
We get into some about Frigg or Freya. We get into even less about like Uller as it starts to go down, and Balder and Forseti as it starts to get even less. We don't have anything that outright says to me that people venerated Loki at all. There's some parts of the Germanic world that have no evidence of Loki existing as a deity. So it might be a Scandinavian-only deity or, along those lines. I think that... What was the original question? I got a little ahead of myself.
What do you think about only celebrating or worshiping one category, in a box?
I think that you're doing yourself a disservice and you're looking at the deities in a way that our ancestors didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they looked at them and said, because of this adjective that I can apply to these, 12 deities, they are the only ones I'm allowed to ever talk to.
Right.
I think that they would say, in this situation, this God is best. In this situation, this God is best. And then, and they wouldn't necessarily say, I'm going to use an Egyptian God now, but they might say, I'll use a Vanir when I need fertility, and I'll use an Aesir when I need war. I might need a specific giantess or a specific giant who is in good standing, like Aegir is, I think, technically a giant.
Mm-hmm.
So if you needed something a little bit rougher than Njord for your sea needs, you'd go to Aegir. And I don't think although we don't have people like bending over and praying to Aegir in our sources or anything, I don't think they would have seen any problem with you doing that.
Right. And yeah, I think, but like you said, limiting, yourself to just one of those where you only, say Loka true, and that's all you were involved in. And that's who your deity was Loki. That's going to probably bring a lot of just discord and turmoil and trouble to your life. Just in general, it's like invoking something negative. He is one of the deities in our pantheon, but it's and his story plays an important part in many of the sagas, but it's not something you'd want to focus on and limit yourself to as a worshiping point.
That also goes into, we didn't put it down here, but there's no such thing as Oda true, like true to only Odin, but there is. People get this like Odin only bent to them, where it's almost like a monotheistic cult where Odin is in charge, and
that's pretty common, actually.
Because there's a lot of Odinic rites and Odinic, specific groups that's all they worship. They're Odinists, and they consider themselves Odinic.
And just because we will honor Odin occasionally, especially at Yule, we feel like is his time. We don't go around at Ostara and knowing that it is a spring goddess kind of festival, say, and to Odin, and you're the only guy ever honoring Odin.
Honored, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just like with seasons changing, I think every Sumbul or bloat kind of has its own inherent theme, and I know Ulfar Folk tends to make a good round and kind of fit everyone in there, so it's not really masculine heavy or really feminine deity heavy. It's not super Aesir heavy, not very Vanir heavy. We kind of do a little bit of everything because that's what fits with all of us.
Right, and it's a good balance, with the deities and the time of year, and things like that. Like Sarah was saying, during Ostara, that's pretty much in the spring fertility festival. You would honor the goddess Ostara, not Odin or Thor or Tyr or something who is a god of justice and war. So yeah, you would want to keep your pantheon according to the seasons as best you can, and we feel that you can tailor that to your own liking. But if you read a lot of the stories, and you'll see which gods play what roles and whether they're a fertility god or a sea god or certain gods, and fit that into your celebrations and your holidays.
But also in that, I think a lot of people get stuck on so-and-so is specifically for this. So like Freya, I think, gets that a lot. Like Freya is goddess of love. When that's not really true at all. It's more on the lustful side and a different nature. But that it seems like people want to do that a lot, especially with comparing other cultures with Northern European or Germanic gods, Scandinavian gods, that they want to equate this person with this person. So they want to say, oh, well, Odin is basically the Germanic version of Zeus. And I think that both those things get stuck in our vocabulary, and that's why we have these little boxes of Asatru only, or Vanatru only, or Lokatru only.
Right.
And I think it's that, I only associate this god with this one thing, this one aspect.
And I feel like a lot of people just get hung up over that, and it's not really such a hard fast rule. It's how you feel about that god or goddess. And there was more to Freya, like Sarah said, than she wasn't just a goddess of love. She received half the Einherjar during Ragnarok that are fallen on the battlefield, and things of that nature. There's more to her than just love, and it was probably more lustful, like Sarah said.
It wasn't really love, guys.
Yeah, and so there's different different ones that you need to just kind of look at and see how they fit, and and if they're pretty much a good fit for that time of the year, then feel free. You can honor how you like. So
we might talk about this in a future episode, but I was doing a lot of looking at kind of that idea of like just because she's a goddess of lust, or we will say carnal interactions.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that she is perverse, that you shouldn't honor her, or, she still has good aspects, and you shouldn't get stuck up on the, she's a saucy lady and we can't abide by that. Like, that doesn't make her unworthy of worship or honoring. It means that she has a role to play and something she can help you with. And for February, because it was St. Valentine's Day, I was looking at like 4 or 5 different goddesses who all have names that kind of associate themselves with love, and looking at, maybe there are different kinds of love. I know there's a Greek concept of like 5 different kinds of love that it might get tied to, or in my head, I was imagining it on like the steps to marriage. And in my head, Freya was like, you're consummating, You're
so what base would that be? Would that be?
Where's the courting part? Which one was that?
there is one that's like forbidden love, and we can get into it at a later date. But kind of going back to that, don't lock yourself in a box of Vanatru, Asatru, Rokatru. Mm-hmm. Don't lock yourself. You don't even lock the gods in that category in their box if they can only do this. And you can look at other mythologies to get better understandings, but don't say because Zeus does this, Odin must. You can get a better understanding of compare and contrasting the gods, or looking at, if they're cousin deities, you can look at what they share, and maybe that's something that you can delve into and think about more, because I think that they are more nuanced. The deities are more nuanced than we often perceive, because it's easy to, listen to a half hour talking about Freya, the love goddess, and looking at the sources and what they say and going by that alone. But thinking about it and looking at it in fun ways and new ways, even if they don't come to big T truths, they can still, the act of thinking about it helps you better understand it, even if it comes to an understanding of, well, she's not quite that, but it still helps you frame what you know.
Yeah, it puts it into perspective using knowledge that you already have. I'm sure a lot of the world is fairly familiar with Greek mythology, or at least who the big players are. Right. And so maybe that's why they find it easier to lock gods of other pantheons into those same roles, because so many people are familiar with them, but it still doesn't make it okay.
Well, that and the Romans were doing that in their empire. Their whole thing was going in, looking at like a Gallic temple or an Iberian. Yeah, I think that's what it in Spain. Anyway, the
Iberian.
Yeah, Iberian. There we go. Hibernian is Irish.
Iberian.
And say, hey, I know you've got this local wooden shrine to your gods. Our god, Mars is kind of like your god. XYZ.
Can we put them beside yours?
Yeah, we'll put them in the same temple, and we'll bid you this nice big marble temple. And by the time it gets to us, we only know them by their hybridized names. Like a good example is when I think Rome or Greece was interacting with Egypt and became Amun Zeus or Amun Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
It was this weird hybridization of the both.
Amun Ra and Zeus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they kind of occupied that same position. They're not the same deity by any stretch.
Right, but combining them and equating them makes it easier for usually conquerors to get the local folk to assimilate with their gods, and they can worship at the same site without feeling like they're taken over or being taken over. So, that does happen. But they're all the pantheon are unique in their own rights, and there may be some similarities and stuff with other Greek and Roman and stuff, but
similarities, but not the same deity.
Yeah, just there's a couple of qualities that may line up right, but not everything has a direct draw a line from this god to that god and match them up. So as far as our categories, again, we're Asatru and Vanatru, Rokatru, and Thursatru, and last but not least, Lokatru.
No, that can be least.
How about least? But in any case, but when you just have one of those as your personal path, you limit yourself a lot to some of the other deities, and just by worshiping that one, some of which are not so nice and bring a lot of chaos. And when it's just the Vanir gods, and you're losing out on all the Aesir gods and things of that nature. So look into that and try to find a balanced approach. That's kind of what we do, and kind of tailor your path if you're on this one to your own liking. And under the regional gods, the Landvetter on your property. You'll notice things on your property where you have a big tree, or you got some giant boulder on your property that you feel has something to do with, the land spirits or something. Feel free to pour an offering at the bottom of that or something when you're done with ritual, and honor the land spirits, and maybe they'll, look over you and protect your property.
And go ahead and notice what kind of animals live around you, and make sure that your offerings are safe for those animals, because we have one aspect of, yes, don't poison your animals by setting chocolate out, and it turns out, the animal that comes around, like a coyote, can't eat chocolate and it dies. But there's also the animals that live around you are the servants of the Vitir, and they are like the messengers. So the Vitir can't just walk out and pick up your offerings. They have to send out their servants, which in my case are possums. But in your case, get to be majestic frickin' deer and coyotes and stuff. So I'm not jealous at all about that. Making sure it's something that they like will make it even easier for your offering to get accepted by the Vitir in charge.
And I actually had a funny story about that. So we have, my family has a good portion of Swedish roots. So we have tomta, and that's what we usually set things out for. So in Swedish tradition, what you set out for tomta, which are basically landvetter, is you set out rice pudding, or they call it porridge, but it's rice pudding, and then you put a pat of butter on top. Well, our daughter went out and set an offering out for the landvetter, for the tomta, and then the next morning everything was gone but the butter. And in Swedish mythology, it's if you don't put the butter on, the tomta will get angry and kill animals or let them go, and you should really put that butter on top. But she was interested in why they ate everything but the butter, and she said, well, maybe it was the birds that ate everything but the butter. And I said, well, that wouldn't really matter, because the birds are there eating it for the tomta, and they're like these little messengers and little carriers of like Eric said, kind of like servants for the landvetter. They can't just pop out and appear themselves. Sometimes they have to send the birds to do it. So I thought that was kind of a funny story.
Yeah, and basically, so regardless of what really happened to it, it's the tradition of putting something out. I mean, what is it going to hurt? You're making an offering to the land spirits, and some people may not believe in those type of things, and other people are kind of they're into the I feel like there's an energy or something on my property, and they may not be able to describe or identify what it is. But what does it hurt to put out a little bowl of porridge for whatever reason? So You could always just do that if you feel you're into that and make an offering. But definitely find and locate on your property where you think the sources of energy, maybe the land spirits would live, or where you feel is like a magical or kind of an important place on your property. And and just make your offerings there all the time and set that up as your regular place.
Any last comments?
No, I think that's about it. You
No,
wanna
I'm
would you
good.
like to wrap it up, Sarah?
All right. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast and hit that like button. Find Ulfar Folk on Facebook at facebook.com/Ulfar Folk and our website, ulfarfolk.wordpress.com. And Ulfar is ULFAR and then folk.
All right. Thank you for listening, and please leave comments. And that concludes our podcast. Have a great day. Thank you.